I want to talk about failure a little bit. I was kind of inspired by Ted and Eric's conversation. So I graduated from Stanford in '88 with a poli-sci degree, which is essentially professional suicide. I mean, it does not prepare you to make money after college. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I did have great passion for music. I'd been playing piano for years and knew I wanted to do something in that field. So the first job I got was actually a nanny. The proper term for that is manny for me. Taking care of 2 kids in Palo Alto. Children is my other lifelong passion. And I spent about 5 years taking care of these kids. And my life consisted of getting up in the morning, sitting down at my piano and practicing for 6 or 7 hours, going to this elementary school and picking these 2 boys up, going home, playing wiffle ball on the street, cooking dinner for the family, and then coming home in the evening and getting back on the piano and playing until I went to bed. And so I kind of woodshed on the piano for many, many years and got pretty good at wiffle ball. And I started playing in rock bands, really sort of immersed myself in music, spent about 5 or 6 years traveling around, living out of a van, and became really familiar with the sort of plight of the working musician. Shared highways and shows with them, hundreds of artists, who really, in my opinion, ought to be able to make a living doing what they're doing, but for lack of a strong promotional vehicle, were essentially invisible. And the plight sort of for most of these musicians was to sort of struggle for years and eventually give it up and go back to some kind of a job. So I did that for a while, and our band had some local success, but really never kind of got over the hump. And then I segued out of playing in a band and began to write music for movies, doing film composing. And the idea for Pandora really was hatched in that experience. When you're a film composer, your principal job is to figure out what a director wants for their movie. And so you have to sit down with them and trying to figure that out. And I had developed this sort of methodology where I would sit with a director and I'd bring a stack of CDs and I'd play music for them. And as I played songs, I would kind of get their feedback, kind of their thumbs up, thumbs down. And they would sort of try to tell me what they liked, what they didn't like, typically not in musicological terms, but they would sort of give me a general idea. And my job was to sort of translate that conversation into something musicological so that I could go back to my recording studio and compose a new piece of music that they would like. And essentially what I was really doing at that time was an informal genome in my head, sort of a musical taste. I was kind of running these people through the equivalent of sort of a musical Myers-Briggs test and developing sort of a portrait of their taste. So I had this idea through my head, but I was really struggling as a film composer. It's not an easy profession. I'd been commuting to Los Angeles, and I had done a handful of very small independent films and was sort of clawing my way up that ladder. And I had this idea one day to codify this process that I had developed with film directors into a product and using technology to build a discovery engine. And it's something that we call the Music Genome Project. And I sat down with some musician friends of mine and sort of talked through this idea, and I created this big sort of template of musical attributes that I thought kind of described a song. And I shared the idea with a friend of mine. I said, look, if we could map songs along this big musical genome and use some kind of algorithm matching technology, maybe that could be used to connect people from artists, well-known artists, to lesser-known musicians based on musical similarity. So kind of a discovery tool that was sort of blind to popularity in an effort to sort of solve that problem that I witnessed for many years playing around talented but unknown musicians. This friend of mine was a former college classmate who at that time had already successfully launched and sold a company, so he had a pretty kind of can-do attitude about it. And he said, yeah, that sounds like a cool idea. Let's go do it. Let's go write a business plan, see if we can raise some money. And so in March of 2000, the first week of March, we raised $1.5 million of venture capital, which was, in hindsight, March of 2000, probably not the best time to start a technology company. 2 weeks later, everything went to hell in a handbasket. But we launched off on this crusade to build the music genome and hired about 50 musicians to sit down, come in the office every day, slap on a pair of headphones and listen to songs and analyze them song by song along close to 400 musical attributes per song. And to build this enormous database and then connect it with a matching engine. And our original idea was we're going to put up a website with a little search box. You type in a song, and it sends back 10 recommendations for other songs that you'd like. We built this technology. It took us about, let's call it 9 or 10 months to build a prototype, because it takes a while to analyze music that way. It's actually completely fucking ridiculous to do it like that. But it really was the only strategy I could think of. So 9, 10 months in, we're finished with a prototype, and we had loaded up a few thousand songs into Microsoft Excel and had built a macro to run to match these songs. So we had our first big test of the matching engine. And I typed in a song, it was a Beatles tune, and hit match, and waited a few minutes because it was a macro running in Excel, matching, sort of a weighted average proximity across hundreds of attributes and thousands of songs. A couple minutes later, the first match that pops up for this Beatles tune is a Bee Gees song. So I thought, oh shit, we're almost a year into this. We've blown through, I don't know, close to $1 million, and it doesn't work. But we then went in and actually listened to the song. Well, it turns out that for people who know the Bee Gees well, before they became kind of a disco band, were essentially kind of a copycat band to the Beatles. They were actually signed by the same manager that signed the Beatles. And I played the song, and literally I thought it was the wrong piece of audio. I thought it was a Beatles song. But turns out, lo and behold, that was the original sound. And so we went from this sort of depression and fear to elation, because this thing actually kind of worked. Unfortunately, we had this great prototype, but we were running out of money. And things were not looking so good in both the world of music as well as the world of investments. I'd begun pitching Pandora to investors kind of a few months before, kind of unsuccessfully. And so to keep the company going, we went to our employees and said, look, we're going to ask you to work for a smaller portion of your salary, and we'll give you we'll make it up in stock for you. And eventually, over time, we asked people to work for less and less until kind of by the end of the second year, people were working for nothing. We called that salary deferral, which, by the way, is illegal in California. We couldn't afford an attorney, so we had no idea that we were breaking the law. So I was kind of fat, dumb, and happy. But in the end, about 50 people worked for almost about 2.5 years for nothing to build this core technology. This is long before we were Pandora. We were still a business-to-business provider of technology, trying to license this to anybody that would license it from us. In fact, Ted was one of our knights in shining armor who signed a multi-year licensing arrangement with us that actually kind of got us over the hump. But we, for about 2.5 years, were really out in the wilderness. By the end of that time, I had maxed out 11 credit cards. I think my credit card debt was $150,000 by the end of that time. And I can't even remember how much money to friends and family and anybody who was unfortunate enough to meet me during that time. And I remember sitting in my dining room with a big dining room table covered with credit card bills. And I was trying to figure out how I was going to sequence my monthly payments. It was like Tetris, like trying to figure out how I was going to get through it. I look back and I reminisce and laugh about it now, but it was no fun at the time. Being terribly poor and looking over sort of a financial abyss is no picnic. And it took us a while to get through that. Fortunately, in the end of 2003, we finally managed to raise a big round of investment, led by a firm in San Francisco called Walden Venture Capital. And that pitch was actually my 348th venture pitch in the course of that 2.5-year period that led to this fundraise. So we raised the money and had an all-hands meeting, which I will never forget. At that point, I had told the team that I was just going to no longer kind of keep them close to what was going on in investment raising world because it was a roller coaster ride and it was just distracting. So nobody had any idea that we'd actually raise this money. So we had an all-hands meeting, which we did every 2 weeks. And typically the topic of the all-hands meeting was, can you work 2 more weeks for nothing? So not occasions of great joy. But instead of this one, we sat down and everybody was sitting around the table, and I just pulled out this huge wad of envelopes, which were payroll for 2.5 years, in some cases, of salary for employees. And every time I say it, I get goosebumps. I have them right now. There was, I think, a certain disbelief in the room. They thought I was, they were probably not good. The checks weren't good or something. But paid back this huge group of employees, and it's actually it's very unusual for anybody who has familiarity with venture capital for a VC to be willing to pay down a debt like that. Typically, they'll invest money forward-looking, and they say, hey, that's your problem, you go fix that. But we had made a commitment to the employees to pay them back. So about $1.5 million, a little more than that, went out of the company that day just to make whole all these employees that had worked for a long time. And subsequently, the company evolved, renamed itself, and we launched a new product called Pandora, which how many people here have actually used Pandora? Nice. And we're enjoying, a wonderful ride now since we've launched Pandora. But my point to all of you today is that most of these things don't come easy, and a lot of the companies that you see really only the part that's the good and easy part, or the fun part, because most of that kind of iceberg lives below the waterline. And I think that the one thing that held this company together over those many years was that we all had, I think, a very unshakable belief that this idea was a good one. We weren't sure how long it would take for us to, help it find its home and to build a business out of it. That was something we obviously didn't know. But we really believed that it was a great idea, and it was kind of, in some ways, crazy and a foolhardy methodology and very counterintuitive and sort of Luddite in a technology world. But it was solving a big, big problem in a really innovative way, and it worked. And so we managed to stick together long enough to push this boulder over the hill. So I hope that any of you here who one day have a crazy idea, most ideas are, by the way, definitionally crazy because they're a new idea. They're not part of the existing, intellectual structure. That if you have that you have the courage of your convictions, and that when people are doubting you, when things don't look so good, and when you get knocked down, that you sort of pick yourself up and keep going and stick with it, because eventually, when you do, I can tell you firsthand, it's an awful lot of fun. Thanks.